Two events took place in June 1987 that would forever change my life. The first, though I didn't know it at the time, was my experiencing the first stages of a chronic illness that would ultimately result in my being hospitalized for months at a time, including undergoing major surgery. The second was the decision by my father that the big screen adventures of Ralph Macchio were a tad too violent compared to the same for Joaquin Phoenix. Instead of going to see the movie that all my 11-year-old friends were going to see, my dad decided we should see Space Camp. And though I wasn't totally opposed to the idea, I had already expressed enough of an interest in space exploration that my mother, a former teacher, had unpacked and shared with me her newspaper clippings from July 21st, 1969. Peer pressure had it that I wasn't very happy that day entering the theater. My attitude completely changed over the course of that 1 hour and 47 minutes, so much so that I insisted we watch until all the credits roll. Contrary to my dad's initial insistence, I just knew that Space Camp had to be a real place, and I was positive it would show up when it was revealed where the movie was shot. Given how I hounded him throughout the whole car ride home to go what I now knew was the real Space Camp, I sometimes wonder if he didn't regret, maybe just for a moment, not taking me to see Karate Kid 2. A karate camp would have been surely easier to find. Fortunately for me and my parents, an older boy on our block had been to Space Camp, and in what seemed like no time at all, the program arrived in the mail. I read and reread those pages over and over again so many times that I remember them to this day. During my first week at Space Camp in August 1987, I was still healthy enough to pass for a kid without problems. That week was everything I could imagine it would be, from building model rockets to wearing flight suits, to designing a space colony, to the ultimate moment of my boyhood dreams, climbing aboard the Space Shuttle simulator. It was during that week that the path to my future was laid out before me. I would someday fly on the real space shuttle. 1 week at Space Camp, though, was not enough. Upon returning to New Jersey, I told my mom and dad I wanted to go again. They were agreeable, though my body had other plans. The illness I had not yet been identified, but that didn't mean that doctors weren't open to subjecting me to a battery of tests. John Glenn, America's first astronaut in orbit, once commented of the medical tests that he and the other Mercury astronauts had underwent during selection that, quote, if you figure out how many openings there are in a human body and how far you can go up into any one of them, you can answer which is the toughest for you. No matter how many tests Glenn and the other 6 were exposed to, I think it would be a fair statement to say I had them all beat. In addition to the tests, I was put on high doses of prescription steroids. The medicine had the effect of dulling the pain, but also retained water in my face, arms, and hands. In some ways, this was more of a challenge than the medical tests ever were. The tests were conducted behind closed doors, but arriving at school, walking through a mall, or going where I knew I was going to be greeted by new people, such as Space Camp, meant having to push past the pointing and the stares and either explain what was wrong with me or just accept the ridicule. But my desire to go back was driven by the growing passion for space exploration, and it was that drive that really helped me push past the outer and inner struggles I was going through. In August 1988, a year after first attending Space Camp here in Huntsville, I attended the Space Camp in Florida. Another memorable week flew by. This time it ended with my receiving the Outstanding Camper Award. It was that sort of positive reinforcement that I needed to forget about the illness and that was keeping me down. In an interview published shortly after I started school again that fall, I told the New Jersey Star-Ledger, "Now I say I have colitis. Colitis doesn't have me." Ultimately diagnosed with Crohn's disease, an illness that plagues the lower abdominal system, my condition would put my words to the ultimate test, subjecting me to debilitating pain, extended hospital stays, and multi-hour surgical procedures that would require months to recuperate. Space Camp, however, remained my goal, my reward for pushing past the pain and getting myself out of the hospital. Looking back at the photos and video you saw of my 4 Space Camp summers that would follow, I can now see the stages of the disease I was battling at the time, from being reduced to skin and bones, through the absence of a photo one year due to the surgery I was undergoing and the untimely death of my father, and then entering remission and gaining foothold towards continuing the rest of my life. Space Camp and its Space Academy 1 and 2 programs had, alongside a very supportive family, including my mother, my grandmother, and sister who are here with me today, provided me the opportunity to see my future despite my illness and keep me pushing for the day I would fly in space. By the time I left Space Academy 2 for the 6th and last time on August 28, 1993, the program had left me with a clear career path to follow. I chose to attend a school, University of Maryland, College Park, that was near a NASA center with the idea that I would co-op. I chose astronomy and physics as majors because I knew that as a NASA astronaut, I would need a degree in either science and engineering. I went so far as to request a copy of the astronaut application just so I could start a checklist as to what I would need to fill in. Unfortunately, what I hadn't immediately realized was that the surgery that put the illness into remission was going to be a deal breaker with NASA. No matter what experience I had, no matter how many degrees I earned, I was never going to be able to be selected as a NASA astronaut. That realization almost broke me. Had it not been for my family, including my late grandfather, who perhaps shared with me the closest fascination about space in my family, I might have given up. But instead, I refocused that same enthusiasm I had for attending Space Camp to finding other ways I could become involved in the space program. The World Wide Web was something new in 1994, and with just 1 megabyte of disk space, most of my peers were creating web pages dedicated to displaying their pet hamster or girlfriend. Remembering an online service I had first discovered when I was here in Huntsville called SpaceLink, an educational bulletin board system, or BBS, that was hosted at the Marshall Space Flight Center, I decided to devote my 1 megabyte to creating a space site. One, as it would turn out, would be one of the first non-NASA space websites online. That first website launched a myriad of opportunities in cyberspace, if you'll pardon the pun. I met and worked with astronauts, I met and worked with actors who played astronauts, and eventually I was chosen to write the on and offline training experiences for private space explorers. All throughout, I drew upon my 6 summers at Space Camp and the lessons they taught me. Perhaps that came to no finer point than last year through the contact I made with a space shuttle commander who attended my same high school. I was invited to sit in with his flight deck crew on their last fully suited simulator run before their mission. Reporting that day to NASA's Johnson Space Center, I somewhat nervously strapped into the empty instructor's seat located behind the commander and waited as the cabin tilted back on hydraulics to simulate the vertical orientation of the vehicle at launch. As I sat there, listening through the headset to the real astronauts go through their pre-launch preparations, I couldn't help but realize that that was going to be as close as I would ever come to flying the space shuttle. The experience was beyond anything I could imagine, but not beyond everything I could recall. For after a few minutes of sitting there and letting the experience soak in, I suddenly had the strongest sense of deja vu. It took me a few seconds to realize why, and just as suddenly I was 11 years old again, climbing aboard the Space Camp simulator, experiencing my dreams about to come true. Thank you.